I'm Rick Parkhill. I'm the director of brand storytelling, and I'm excited to be joined by Ben and Matt here today for a conversation on the art of the short brand documentary. And who better to talk about that than the two-time Oscar-winning filmmaker Ben Proudfoot and the editor at Deadline, the documentary editor Matthew Carey. So had a little conversation with the two of you guys last week, and if we could continue that vein, we'll have a very active discussion today. Everybody here, this is going to be an interactive conversation. So drop your comments in the chat. We'll be reviewing those and bringing you in. So if there's something you want to ask or even a comment that you want to make, you're welcome to do so. Just put it in the chat first, then we will bring you in. Matt, I'm going to turn this over to you without any further ado. You are the man here to talk to Ben, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys and have a good time.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to be with you, Ben. Great to see you. We're just at your office for the first time in Los Feliz. I think you're there in your office.
Yeah, you have a great view of my window air conditioning unit.
That's lovely. It is
just starting to be used as the summer.
It's an old building with historic ties.
It does.
Actually, as you were telling me, it used to be Walt Disney's original studio, the first place he set up business.
Believe it or not, when he came out here from Kansas City in 1923, he set up shop first in his uncle's garage down the street, and then rented a place in this building, and that's how I first found it, and where I founded Breakwater 12 years ago. So, and this 2023 is 100 years since the founding of the Walt Disney Company in this building.
It's remarkable, and I bring up that because your films, whether they're in the branded space or in, say, for the New York Times Op Docs, they're about story, they're about backstory, they're about emotional points that really help elucidate somebody's journey. So I bring it up really in some ways in that context. And in terms of your brand work, I mean, those who follow the Oscars certainly know of that you are a two-time winner, as Rick was saying, most recently, just a couple of months ago, for The Last Repair Shop. And you were nominated for a Concerto as a Conversation and also won for directing The Queen of Basketball. But in terms of your branded work, what do you consider the first branded documentary that you made?
Well, I made a number of projects that were just sort of like direct, more I would say in the realm of like corporate videos for like people's retirement. I mean, this is not that long ago,
No, it's quite recent.
9 years ago. When I was first starting, maybe 10 years ago. But the first real kind of like brand funded short documentary film, I think about work that we did with Charles Schwab. I made a 4-minute film called Why This Road about Dan Portelance, who was a chef who became a culinary arts teacher at a high school. And that was kind of the first time that I felt like it was both a film that an audience would love and something that was important to me as a filmmaker, that did justice to the person in the film and was under sort of like a brand's values or its story as a company. And those three sort of circles of the Venn diagram, we hit all three of them in one film. That was the first one. And that was like, I think 2016. When we did that.
And obviously Charles Schwab was very pleased with the work and the outcome, because then you did some more collaborating.
We're still working with Charles Schwab. Yeah. It was an interesting situation because, so much of the success of this kind of work has to do with direct conversation between the filmmaker, the filmmaking company, and the brand. I really do believe that. And that first project with Schwab was through a couple layers of agencies. And I remember it was very difficult to kind of get through that process. And the next on the next one, when Charles Schwab hired us directly, not only did the budget go up by about 10x, so that was good because there was no intermediaries. But also I was able to ask them the question, why are you spending this money? What are you trying to get out of this project? And they were transparent with me. They were trying to, put their values into a film, right? Like for Schwab, they had this campaign, Own Your Tomorrow, right? This whole idea of making big decisions in your life in order to take your life by the horns and forge whatever your future is going to be, and telling stories in that vein, because that's what their company was all about. And as soon as I understood it in terms of, okay, this is a business problem that we're solving with a movie, it was much easier to kind of get the job done and make something that could actually solve their problem and was interesting and entertaining to the audience. And I was able to have a direct rapport in defending the sort of creative territory of the film from, getting in its own way by being overly branded or what have you, which is often the risk.
Yeah, and then in terms of the own your tomorrow, I think implicitly in the film, you're talking about how Charles Schwab owned his tomorrow, the decisions he made of how he realized there was an opportunity in the, in stock trading that wasn't being met by Merrill Lynch and other of the big firms.
Yeah,
and so
that was a later film called Mayday that we did that in. And that, yeah, the same thing. It's like sometimes the films are explicitly about a brand, especially a brand's origin story. I always find is absolutely fascinating. It helps you as a consumer or a client understand who they are. And it's also very exciting. An origin story of anything significant is always very exciting. And so we did that with Schwab, like you said, and how he founded the company, and the initial insight that his intent was to democratize investing so that anybody, even $100, you can invest in Wall Street, which was impossible before the law changed May 1st, 1975. And his company was the one who sort of went after that market. So we're story first, story and character first. That's what the filmmaker is bringing to the table, is just like we're incapable of not being that way. And that's where the beauty can happen, when that overlaps with what the story the brand's trying to tell.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in this as, someone who's not expert in the way that people on this Zoom are, but there's an important distinction between advertising and what you are doing in branded content. I mean, advertising, it seems to me, has to do with specific campaigns and products. It's not really, it's partly about the identity of the brand, but what you're doing is really establishing a foundation of who we are. In other words, if you take the example of McDonald's, I don't think you've worked with them, but anyway, I'll throw that out. It's like, okay, now that's sort of their thing. It doesn't even have words. But that's not the McDonald's story. That's not the whole story. So you're really getting into these foundational elements of what a brand is about.
Yeah, I think there's some the vocabulary is important to be specific about, so we know what we're talking about. When you think about a brand, you might think of the logo, you might think of a jingle or a tagline, something like that. But when I'm thinking about it from a filmmaking perspective, it's more about the story of the brand and what does it stand for? What are the perceived values? And do I trust it? I think as human beings, we are wired to, either if it's another person, or whether it's a group of people or a company or an institution, etc. We're trying to understand whether that we can trust that entity, and if so, what can we trust from it, right? What are they known for? What do they believe in? What's core to them? And that is very different from, although that can influence advertising, it's very different, I think, from advertising in that it's not asking for anything in particular. It's just stating who they are. The best sort of brand storytelling and brand trust building is simply stating who the company is through the kinds of stories that they tell and celebrate. And so in the best brand filmmaking, I think the brand is not even present in what the story is, but the story that's being told is this is the kind of story that the brand cares about. It's representative of its values, that it has ensured that this story gets told. And therein lies the magic. And so I think about brand and the kind of work that we do far more as PR, communications, long-term ideation of what the company is, and less like specific quarterly advertising marketing. It's much more about who the brand is. How do I feel about the brand? Do I align with their values, et cetera, so that when the advertising does come along, it's far more effective. And that has been well proven that people who are exposed to positive brand messaging will be far more receptive to, you know, 2 Egg McMuffins for the price of 1. So it's like that's the trade-off there. The companies need to tell their story so people know who they are. You know, that's the key.
Yeah, so that say an individual ad campaign or even an individual ad needs to be sort of embedded in this larger environment. It springs from it. It doesn't come first.
Yeah, and the short documentary in particular, which I know that's our topic here, which is our, you know, focus at Breakwater Studios, I think is one of the best ways to deliver those stories for a whole host of reasons. But I also think when we talk about brand storytelling, 90% of the time, that's where generally the rubber hits the road, is as a short documentary or a non-fiction piece that's less than 20 minutes. The vast majority of stuff that's created under the auspices of brand storytelling or branded content is that. But we don't often talk about that because I'm not sure why. But the short documentary is, I think, the real best currency for this kind of work.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about it today and reveal all of those secrets. It seems to me also that it's important that the kind of work that you do, or probably others in this space, that it doesn't look like advertising.
Right.
Because, you know, you're talking about the audience. The audience is very sophisticated, you know, I think it's safe to say. And they kind of know where, it looks like an ad. It's very polished. It's got, you know, a certain look in it. They're not going to receive the message the same way, or the underlying message. If it looks like an ad, it's got to be something different.
Yeah, and I think even going one step further, it's not simply that it can't look like an ad, it can't be an ad. Right? I think there's a lot of stuff, you know, there's a lot of stuff that is, I've got an idea. What if we basically take an ad, but we make it docu-style, and we make it handheld, and we put an interview, even though we're telling them what to say? That's still an advertisement. It may be in a certain, you know, documentary sauce to try to trick the audience, right? So the work that we do it's literally a documentary, right? And it takes a certain leap of faith on behalf of the brand to say the true story here is a story that we want to tell that's good for us, you know. And there may be elements of the story that are neutral to us, or that are slightly, you know, or are adjacent to something that we might disagree with or whatever. But we're in the business of telling the truth because we want to be trusted as a brand, and people who tell the truth and are associated with the truth are trustworthy and trusted, right? And as a documentary filmmaker, I won't get involved unless that the essence of that is there, because I have, you know, journalistic integrity and a brand of my own to think about, and that I'm not interested in tricking the audience into consuming an advertisement by, you know, breading it and deep frying it in documentary oil. So I think that's a really important thing, and frankly is a lot of what's being sold at the present time is basically taking the meat and potatoes of an advertisement and gussying it up as a documentary. That is not what I think is the most effective. I mean, you can do that. You can spend a lot of money doing it. How effective is that? Not very. It's because the audience is highly sophisticated and can immediately tell what it is they're watching. We get trained all day long for multiple hours a day, and we're able to very quickly determine what's an advertisement and what's not.
Oh, I think that's very true. As a consumer, I mean, we all are, of constant messaging and advertising and news stories. Yeah, your antenna is always up as to what is this thing that I'm looking at?
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the brands that you've worked with. You, of course, mentioned Charles Schwab, UNICEF. You've worked with them. Something called Unity Technologies, which is kind of a 3D game engine. That's interesting because you did a series of films with them. I won't say for them because I think it is with them.
It is much more with, yeah.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. And that's an interesting challenge in part because it's complicated to explain what Unity Technologies is. You're not getting an easy assignment there.
Yeah, I mean, I often find that we're in that situation where part of the issue is what the heck does this company do? And that's a challenge on behalf of the company, is that people don't know what it is that we do. And so part of my job is to help translate that through storytelling so that people understand what the heck is it and what impact is it really making in the world. Unity Technologies is very simply a software that allows for three-dimensional spaces to come alive and be interacted with, participated in, shared, etc. And it's the basis of an enormous number of apps and video games. It's just technology that powers those things that is increasingly relevant in the world. And the films that we made for them were in the lead up to them going public to tell the story of what is this thing to an investor. How does it, how is it used? It's incredibly useful in self-driving cars, incredibly useful in the film and television space. It's incredibly useful in, architecture and building buildings and that kind of thing. So it was films about all those different things. Now that is more sort of one side of things where it's explicitly about this company and what it is they're doing, and there's clients talking about Unity Technologies. That is an industrial style of filmmaking that we do. But in many ways, it's totally polar opposite from, if Unity Technologies funded a 15-minute documentary about an artist, and maybe it's under their larger idea of, the world is better off with more creators in it. Unity, that's a whole different bailiwick. So there is a division between this is explicitly about the company so that you can understand it. And here's another story, courtesy of, as a public service, courtesy of the brand, in the same way that, a brand might pay for a hospital wing and have its name associated with it, or commission a piece of public art, or what have you. Real sort of brand-funded filmmaking is much more the latter, which is all about making a deposit into the universe, giving a gift to the audience. That's an enormous sort of central metaphor of our whole ethos at Breakwater. Is really good brand-funded filmmaking as a gift to the audience. And if you think about giving a gift to your friend on their birthday, right? Which friend do you want to be? Do you want to be the friend who got something for, the other person that they really want to use themselves? The wrapping paper has their face all over it. When the person opens it, they say, "Oh, that one's from me. Don't you like it? Didn't you like it? Remember who gave you that gift." Do you want to be that friend? Which it seems like some brands maybe unknowingly try to be that friend. The other version of it is you give them a gift, it's wrapped humbly in newspaper, and they open it up, and it's exactly what they wanted. And they said, "Who got me this gift?" And you're at the back of the room, and you say, "That's me." That's who you want to be as a brand funding and presenting filmmaking. Is you only want to appear after the, in a subtle way, in a humble way, in a backdoor way. If you take too much credit for it, it actually has the adverse effect of creating a bad taste in the audience's mouth. And that kind of nuance and very specific showmanship is essential in figuring out how to present a story within the sphere of a brand.
Yeah, if the takeaway for the audience is essentially, look how great we are. I mean, that's, I
Don't forget, next time you see an advertisement for our company, remember this, right? Nobody wants to be beholden. It's the difference between gratitude and obligation, right? You want to feel grateful to the brand that they made this movie happen and this story told. Good on them for making this film, but you don't want to say, okay, if I enjoy this, they're gonna try to sell me something, right? Like it's a different transaction that's happening.
Yeah, it's a different proposition. And again, just to repeat, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So don't be shy, everybody out there. We want your questions, comments to be incorporated throughout. And Rick actually is bringing up something about naming a favorite short brand documentary that I guess either you've seen or perhaps been involved with. But
yeah, I mean, I think friends of mine, Rika Zatabchi and Sam Davis, made a film called A Woman's Place that KitchenAid was involved in, that ended up on Hulu, that I think is pretty fantastic, a high watermark in short documentaries that a brand commissioned. Just a really good movie, well made, highly crafted, interesting stories about something interesting. You could argue with it, right? The brand was taking a stand. I mean, I don't know exactly how you would argue with it, but it was about something, and the brand was, you knew who helped do it, but you weren't hit over the head with it at all. And I think that's an absolutely fabulous example. On the side of like the company is in it specifically and called out, or it's about the company. There's a film that Errol Morris made a number of years ago called They Were There for the 100th anniversary of IBM. Excellent, right?
oh, wow.
Basically took you through all these engineers who, discovered fractals and engineered the first grocery barcode scanners and things like that. Really interesting, relevant stuff that you're like, wow, this is so interesting. I had no idea IBM was behind all these things. And you walk out of it really appreciating all the things that IBM does and whatever. And of course, it's about and by IBM as a celebration for this anniversary. And so those are two examples that I look at as like, wow, fabulous brand money spent and very enjoyable for the audience. Clearly the filmmaker cared about it and the brand got something out of it too.
Yeah, interesting that those two people you mentioned are also Oscar winners. Obviously Errol Morris, but Rika Zatabchi and Sam won for Period, End of Sentence. So they're doing films that of all sorts, including the kind that wind up in the Oscar race. So we have a question from Zach Williams. Is this something where, Rick, you can help? We bring Zach in to ask it, or you want me to sort of read off?
Sure. Why don't you come on, Zach, and ask your question?
Oh boy, put me on the spot here.
Yeah. Hi, Zach.
Hi.
How are yours?
Thanks for having us. Thank you guys for the time too. This is awesome. But no, this is just a conversation that we're having sort of on our side, on the production side, of like, obviously we always want to try to find sort of larger distribution for a long form piece, whether it's a short doc or a feature or whatever. And whether that's a streaming, a network, whatever, but obviously there's no guarantee necessarily unless you're sort of paying to play. So I guess my question for you is like, how have you had these conversations with brands of like, hey, there's not necessarily a guarantee that your show or your film is going to go on Netflix, but it's still absolutely worth the investment. So I'm just curious, like, I know there's a lot of ways to approach it. I'm curious how you do personally.
Yeah. So are you a production company, or where do you live in the ecosystem?
Yes, we're a production company working on sort of development, and mostly the bread and butter is commercial work, but we're expanding into more long form and branded content like that too. So
yeah, I mean,
and let everybody know your production company, Zach.
that's called Rakish.
Awesome. Yeah, so the question of where do you distribute, and in a particular short documentary, I'll focus on that because that's kind of my world. You know, the truth of the matter is that is an answer that's sorting itself out live. There is not an obvious or tried and true way of doing it. I think, but there's a few things, major things that are happening that will make the answer to that question much easier. Right now, most of the sophisticated brands that we're working with are spending 3 or 5 times the cost of the film to distribute it. So we almost, unless it's a very particular case, we almost never go into a filmmaking endeavor where the brand doesn't know, acknowledge, and have planned for that. And that money will either be handled internally within generally a sophisticated media operation within the company, or shoulder to shoulder with an agency or a media agency that they work with. And that's generally most of what we do. And I think a lot of times unsuccessful branded content is simply where a film has been sold in, but there are no resources reserved for when the film is done. And a paid spend associated with it is really important, even if it's not like pay to play, inserting it on TV or inserting it in a thing, but just in general, publicizing it, creating events, anything, any sort of organizing principle to get people to come and watch it, find the audiences that you want. Maybe it's a college class tour. Maybe you're going around to different hospitals and having screenings for employees or whatever, depending on what the movie is. But I will say that streamers in this new era, and having been more and more squeezed to figure out how to make the money, are open and increasingly open, not only to accepting money from advertisers, but I think they're going to be increasingly open to participating in the distribution of brand-funded work. And I think short documentary is going to be at the center of that. And here's why. The financial risk taken to create a short documentary is a fraction of a feature documentary. And that, at least initially, the enormity of the investment in a feature film or a 10-part series or whatever is an enormous risk. It also takes multiple years. In fact, oftentimes much longer than the average tenure of a chief marketing officer. So figure that, right? If you're a chief marketing officer, are you going to make a bet that's going to pay off after you've probably left the company? Probably not. But a short documentary will be done in 6 months, or 9 months. So that's another thing. And again, the KPIs for the brands will be entirely different from a streamer's KPI, which is they're thinking about completion rate, right? How many hours are you spending on the platform watching whatever streamer? A brand is going to be more interested in how many people just watch it in general. The length of time watching the story is not as important to them. And therefore, the short documentary and shorter form content will become increasingly relevant. All that is to say, I think for a production company like yours, you will begin to have a menu of options to distribute the work that you create on popular streamers to the exact audience that they want to reach, in the same way that you might do that through Google or Facebook or whatever today. And that will be a total seismic shift in answering that question for brands, which right now does not have a good answer. But hopefully that helped flesh out a lot of those answers.
Yeah, I want to ask some questions about process. So when you're shooting, you're on set, and you've worked out a particular project, there's a basic agreement on it. You welcome the client onto the set, right?
I do not.
I'm teeing you up there.
That was a trick question.
That was a trick question. Come on down. We've got great craft services.
I can't say I've always been successful in that rule, and the rule doesn't exist for the reason that people might think. It's not because I'm not interested in collaborating. It's because I think that it fundamentally kind of changes the alchemy of a set when you have someone representing the financial and sort of branding interests of a company. My interest as a filmmaker, I'm all about the story. I'm all about this person. I'm all about protecting this person, making sure this person looks good, that their story is well represented, is truthfully represented. And that is my purpose. And the purpose of the set is very clearly that, right? We're here to make art. We're here to capture the truth, whatever it may be. And the moment someone's on the set where it's like, well, they're here on behalf of so-and-so marketing, the alchemy of the whole set changes, even if that's not their mindset, which it often is not, to be honest. Just the knowledge that that person is there watching with corporate eyes, with a fiduciary duty of selling whatever, it just changes the chemistry of it. And when we're trying to make emotional documentaries where people are really revealing themselves, it actually hurts us, doesn't help us. So we, again, this is not true in 100% of the cases, but in general, we have a quiet period in terms of interaction between the production company and the brand, between when we decide who will be the star of the short and the rough cut. There might be some check-ins along the way, but there's no real meaningful creative interaction as we go out and actually harvest and capture the footage and sound and whatever else, archival materials that we'll need to tell the story. That we do in partnership with the person who's agreeing to be in it, and that partnership alone.
Rick, I'm going to get to your question in just a sec, but sort of related to what we're just talking about. What have you learned about contracts through this process of doing it, and then the importance of what needs to be in the contract from your point of view?
Yeah. So it's a really important question, because I think oftentimes production companies, in their insatiable need for more business, more money, more contracts, etc., very rarely say no. And so it gives the brand far too much, in my opinion, leverage and control in the arrangement. And a much better situation is one where there's a good power, like a good marriage, that both parties have a similar, there's an actual dynamic there, not just a play dynamic, but a real dynamic there. So in terms of breakwaters contracts, we're very rigid in sort of what the minimum things that must be met are. And we have very clear language that we are objective documentary storytellers. And, at no time will we be asked to or mandated to perform something that is directly related to promoting the activity of the brand. That's not what this is about, right? This is about telling a story. We're not here to defame the brand, obviously, but there needs to be a certain level of freedom. And oftentimes our agreements give me as a filmmaker 100% creative control over the film. And I take that responsibility with extreme weight, because I need to make sure I, deliver on all of the different stakeholders' needs and wants, or I would be very quickly out of business. But what it does is it makes sure that there is one voice, and it's not necessarily the brand's voice that is creating this thing. So the contract is somewhat rigid in that sense. And there are people in the room that know that very well from either the breakwater side or the client side. And I think that's really important. I think oftentimes, and also being very strict about what the brand's input is and how that is met, because I think a lot of times production companies get run dry in making a whole bunch of different changes on behalf of the brand, because the contract doesn't protect for a certain number of rounds of notes or collated notes or what have you, and are so disempowered in the contract that they have to say yes because they want to continue the brand relationship. So I try, when we negotiate our contracts, to make it a little bit more fair in the dynamism between the two entities.
Thank you. And we got a question from Tracy Lanza. So can we bring in Tracy?
So for some reason, my video won't start, so you can only hear my voice. Anyway, thank you, Ben. This is actually really, really wonderful. I love your description of brand storytelling, and I'm just sitting here smiling, and you would see my face if my camera go on. But this is a question that you kind of just addressed in the contracting part. And just so you know where I come from the brand. So most of the work that I've done has been on the brand side. And because I've spent a lot of time on the agency, I think I have at least some insight in how to protect the creatives from the worst interest, because the brands will want to get involved in post. And so I wonder if you can give us any insights on how to make sure whatever you've provided for in the contract, when you're actually showing edits, how to make sure that you don't get into that back and forth that can really take things down.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think these kinds of conversations have everything to do about trust. Like how much do the individuals who work at the brand trust me as a filmmaker? And I'm always looking for partners who are deferent creatively to us, right? Like I would hope that in between the two of us, that we're the experts on filmmaking and story structure, right? Not that we can't make mistakes or we don't have oversight and there should be no discussion whatsoever, but that's our role in the transaction, is that we know how to make a movie that the audience will like, that's well crafted, et cetera, and we're experts on all the things. That's my responsibility. We have to be experts on all those things. And so, and the contract generally allows for us to take that control in consultation with meeting very specific elements. What are those elements? Probably there's a time limit of like, what is the thing that we're creating? Who the movie is about, and generally what the meaning of the film is, very generally, very general terms. It's like one sentence description of what the movie's about. There's no storyboards, there's no script, there's no detailed synopsis, nothing like, there's no deck, nothing like that. It is a lot is left to trust to our company to go figure out. And, if we get into a situation where there's a huge, 5-page list of notes and these better be done by Tuesday, I just have to go back to whoever the key stakeholder is, whose signature is also on the contract, and talk about the nature of our relationship and, how this is going to work. And I'm not scared of doing that, because I know that the most important thing is that we create something that actually will work for the brand. And a big part of my job is making sure that those instincts don't get in the way. But I'm pretty strong on those points. And I'm not afraid of saying no, I don't think that's the right idea. Or really often what it is really trying to understand the basic place that instinct to make that change or do whatever is coming from, and see if I can address that in a way that might fix that problem better or in a different way than they thought. That's often how I solve that, but it's mostly just being very clear from the beginning and being willing to walk away if it doesn't seem like it's going to be a good relationship. I think most branded content that's not good comes out of bad relationships, where there is an enormous power imbalance between the brand and the filmmaker.
I love that answer. It's a great answer. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Rick, you wanted to mention something about REI and AMC theaters.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
I did. Hold on, guys. I'm having a little technical issue, but here I am. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, good. Ben, I was just thinking about this because a lot of the short documentaries that are made are viewed on a small screen, on a phone or a computer or tablet, and often don't get the luxury of being able to be enjoyed on the large screen, right? Did you happen to see the announcement this week with REI, AMC, and Mountain Film Festival?
I just saw that today. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to applaud Paulo Matola at REI, and I think Brian Newman was involved in that too. But what a great thing. They're going to 100 theaters with short films that appeared in the Mountain Film Festival. So it's all, outdoor related content. But what do you think about that? I mean, how do you get short docs into a theater where people can enjoy the art of these films? I mean, your films are much more beautiful on a large screen than on a phone.
Yeah, I mean, I think I loved reading about that. I think it's a fantastic partnership. I'm really excited to see how that works and how people enjoy it. I mean, as a member of the Academy, I often think about the word theatrical, because the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, that's what we are, tasked with protecting and advocating, is theatrical motion pictures. So talk about the Oscars or the short documentary format. What is a theatrical short documentary? Does that mean that its main, venue is a movie theater, or is it a description of the theatricality as an adjective of a motion picture in terms of its artfulness, and the style of it in terms of craft and its purpose and music and cinematography and all the art forms that go into it. I actually think that in some, I wouldn't agree that my work is always more beautiful on a movie theater screen.
Oh, come on.
I've been to some pretty crappy movie theaters. It also might be better to watch some of my film alone on a phone with good headphones. It might be more impactful than in an empty theater where nobody is there, which unfortunately is a lot of movie theaters these days. So I think the largesse of a movie theater packed with people, sure, that is an incredible and very different experience than watching something alone. And there, people argue till they're blue in the face about, which is better and what should we do to preserve one over the other. But I also, to be honest, come from a generation where the first films that I created were not for the movie theater. They were for people's laptops and for their computers and for their phones. And in the same way that, the generation in, filmmakers that came up in the 60s and 70s, Spielberg, et cetera, they were the first generation who made movies where they weren't considering the proscenium of the theater. Our generation isn't even considering the theater itself. And I think, that's really interesting. In the context of the AMC Mountain Film REI deal, I think it's absolutely fabulous. But I hope it's extremely successful, and I hope there's more of it, because I think short films belong in the theater too. But I don't buy into the idea that short and mobile first is worse, and then theatrical is better. I think they're just different. And I might be alone in that, but I think that sort of hierarchy of importance is baloney.
I'm gonna remember this word and try to use it in some vernacular. Theatricality. I like that. I'm gonna keep that.
Yeah.
But how many of your clients are thinking, like, we're gonna spend all this time and money and effort, put all this passion into creating a 15-20 minute film? We'd love to have that experience of seeing a live audience react to it. So are they interested in the festival route, or private screenings? I mean, that experience of seeing people live, sitting together in a group, reacting to the film, has got to be a reward that brands and filmmakers are looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I don't know any filmmaker who doesn't love that.
Right.
But I mean, having your 20-minute short film play in front of Oppenheimer to a packed audience is an entirely different experience than having your short film play in a block of 5 other short films on Tuesday at 2 p.m. in some theater somewhere that 7 people have attended. It's an entirely different experience, and we have to be aware of that. And it's not to bash, film festivals or movie theaters, but it's a huge difference. And like, I just have to be practical about, just because it's in a movie theater doesn't mean it's better. I think if you're able to throw an event that's full of people who want to see it, who expect to see it, who are interested in being there, who are all there for the same purpose, there's nothing better. But I don't think our industry has done a really good job, or any job at all, of how to do that for short form work. The idea of short films being part of the theatrical experience obviously was a given, 80 years ago, 90 years ago, when people would go to the theaters and stay for a loop of entertainment that included newsreels, et cetera, and short films as well. Now you're not expecting to see a short documentary, and you may not want to see it. And as soon as it comes up, you may be waiting for it to go away so you can see the thing that, you came there to see and paid, $30 and hire a babysitter to see. And you're thinking, how late is this going to go? So I don't know. I'm curious to see how all those things work out. I also think that a big problem with theatrical distribution of short documentaries is the sheer amount of time and effort that it takes to get to a theater and leave home and drive there and park and whatever, to only be presented with a 20-minute film when you've spent an hour and a half on, it doesn't make any sense, so then you get into
well, I guess that's why, REI, AMC, it's a number of films, so it's not a 15-minute sitting and you don't get through your popcorn before the film's over.
Yeah, and the blocks, I'm interested in the blocks of films. And I think it's oftentimes over-programmed. Like, anybody who's been to a film festival and watched 5 or 6 short films in a row, it's not a pleasant experience. Individually, the films might be absolutely fantastic, but oftentimes short documentaries are about something. Maybe there's an issue or a heavy issue, and sitting there for 3 hours and being bombarded by beginning, middle, and end 6 times, all these different intractable problems, can be a very unpleasant experience, just to be totally honest. And
it could emotionally exhaust you.
It's not pleasant, and so it's an issue we just have to be real about and solve. How do we have, what additional elements can we pack? Like, I'm really interested in the idea of, you have a sort of a main event film. Maybe it's a little bit long. Maybe it's not 15 minutes, but maybe it's 25 minutes or something like that. And there's additional elements to it. Maybe there's a lead up. Maybe there's a Q&A with the filmmakers or the actual person or whatever. Maybe there's additional stuff that makes it an hour and a half, makes it an evening worth experiencing. But you don't have this schizophrenic experience of watching all these things all in a row, which can be really tough. It's kind of like, going out for dinner and there's like a different chef producing every single course. And
it's Chinese and Italian and Vietnamese food, and
all of them are trying to be the main course. It can be tricky, and that's where the act of curation becomes really important. And I trust with this AMC Mountain Film REI combination, I'm sure they'll be impeccably curated with all of this in mind. But we've all been to those. I mean, sometimes the Oscar nominated short films, sitting through, Matt, you've probably done there, sitting through all 5 of them back to back in a 3-hour block. It's unpleasant. You want to leave. You're like, when is this? When? How many of these are there? And I don't want anybody thinking that during anybody's film. So there's these, when we think about the theater and the short form, there are just practical issues that need to be solved.
Hey, Ben, I've got another quick question, and then I'm going to stop stepping on Matt's show here and turn my video back off. But what have you learned over the past 10 years of making short docs, Ben, when you've got to compete in a crowded media environment? What are the things that you've learned most about Like what makes a film watchable? What grabs people's attention and keeps it? What are some tips you could share about that, about really what makes a short doc watchable to the end?
Yeah. Well,
Just
you know,
have it produced by Ben Proudfoot, I guess.
well,
Just go
no,
to Breakwater.
I'm not the only one. You know, I was a magician before I was a filmmaker. So to me, the cardinal sin is to make something that's not entertaining. It has to be entertaining. And just that word entertainment comes from tenere, the Latin word tenere, to hold, right? To hold someone's attention. How do you hold their attention? So the first and easiest way that you can do that is select a story as a filmmaker that holds your attention, right? That you would want to show up, that you would want to click on to watch, that you are curious about. So anytime I make a film, I am selecting material that I really want to know about, you know, and I'm a very curious person. So I don't mind spending 9 months going into a rabbit hole about a particular topic. But I think the most important thing is that the filmmaker both has the interest and the authority to pursue that out, and that will come through in the film. There's lots of other things that I think can help make something entertaining. You know, generally we think of, just very practically, we think about the top of the movie having some kind of hook, right? An unanswered, compelling, unanswered question, right? That the movie starts with. You want to know who these people are, or you have a big question of something about them or what happened, or you say to yourself, I can't believe I didn't know this story, or how do they do that, or who is that person? A compelling unanswered question right at the top of the film that is answered in a satisfying yet unexpected way at the end. You know, very basic idea. But you know, it's like, it's the same thing that, like, you know, my mom did to me, which is like, get your homework done and I've got a surprise for you. Okay, you know, I'm gonna get my homework done, and what was it? And if it's good, I'll do the same thing tomorrow. And so, as a very basic thing, I think that's entertaining. The other thing is just like using all craft to help something be propelled forward. So, you know, 99% of stuff that's created, that's brand funded, does not have an original score. Music is way older than cinema. It has way greater effect in having an emotional reaction and carrying the audience emotionally to where you want them to go. And so licensing stock footage for $150 and, you know, plastering that over your short film, it is a huge misstep. And then additionally, not even just having an original score, but having an original score that is telling the story and helping propel the story forward, that's giving the audience the impression that they should trust this thrill ride of this movie, is incredibly important to keep the audience entertained, to keep the pace going. And those are two big things that I utilize, and I see a lot of other, you know, filmmakers utilize to keep people engaged. And then the third thing is just that it's personal and emotional, right? If it's not emotional, it's educational. And if it's educational, it's probably not going to be all that interesting. And so we always come from a place of, why is this emotional? Not just what happened, but why. And because it was my job, is not that good of a why, right? We are always pushing beyond that to sort of like what the person's core purpose. Who are their parents? Why did they want to do this? Why do they care so much about it? And if they don't care, it's probably not going to be that good of a film. So those are some things that I think about when I take on a project, is that humanity, the music being very important. I see that often being not invested in where it could be. And just simple story structure, setting it up with a compelling question or a hook, and then paying it off in a satisfying but unexpected way.
Well, I think you really are a master storyteller, and I'm glad Rick asked about that, because I was making notes and watching your films, both branded and the ones I have seen and loved before, like your Oscar winners. But the music is absolutely critical, and also is vital to the pace. That's how you change. That's how you keep the audience engaged.
Yeah.
I wanted to quickly ask, I'm very interested in the fact that you use a lot of archive in your pieces, which I think is kind of unexpected. Clearly, there's a lot of research that goes in there just into who's the subject of this film, but also it's like what archive can help us tell this story.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, initially when I was making films, I stayed away from archive. I thought it was boring and dusty and Ken Burns, and I'm not interested. And if it's not cinema, if the camera's not moving, I'm not interested. And then COVID came along, and we were severely limited in terms of what we had the capacity to shoot, and it was like the interview and maybe a couple other shots, and we were kind of forced into the archival business. And I, of course, fell in love with it because it's not simply the replaying of films, but it's actually transforming those films or those photos or those newspaper articles to become shots, right? It's not just cutting to a photo, but it's a shot. It's a piece of your B-roll. That's how we think about it. And it's also something that is exciting and gives the audience the impression, because it's often absolutely true, that this is the definitive telling of this story, right? It's not just a telling of it. It is the definitive telling of it. They will never have to, watch another documentary about this story, because this clearly is the deepest dive somebody is going to take on this particular story. And all of the best archival has been brought here. If you went to a restaurant in Nova Scotia, where I'm from, and somebody said, you want to try some Nova Scotia seafood, and they bring you a tiny little plate with a mussel and a little spot of crab, you might still sort of be looking around have some subliminal unrest of what else is there. If somebody brings you a huge seafood tower that's very detailed, that has every different mollusk under the sun and, lobsters and whatever, you feel satisfied. You don't have any subliminal unrest that there's additional information that is not being presented to you. And so in our films, we are often using an enormous number in quick succession of historical photographs, newspaper articles that are creating sort of a chronological enfilade of experiences, words, images that are taking you into the past, and give you a sense of satisfaction that you've seen everything. You are intellectually satisfied that there's no stone left unturned in this intellectual journey of figuring out what the story is.
Yeah, you use it beautifully, I think, again, for pacing, those quick shots. I know we're going to wrap here. I did want to mention that you're heading off to New York for a couple of things at Tribeca. One at the Tribeca Film Festival, film that you executive produced about Motorcycle Mary, pioneer in motocross sports, but also a Tribeca X, which probably the audience here will know about what that's about, because it's very much about brands and advertising. And this is a film about Elon Specht, who created the extraordinary campaign for L'Oreal's Because I'm Worth It. So that's not a branded film, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were working with McCann there. So it's an interesting intersection between all we've been talking about.
Yeah, it is a partnership with McCann and with L'Oreal. But again, I mean, that's one of the films that I'm most proud of, because it's a film that stands on its own. Those were partners that were incredibly brave to give me the space that I needed to tell the story. And I think the film is one of the best things we've created. The Final Copy of Elon Specht is the title.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ben.
Yeah,
Hey, well, thanks to both of you, Ben, Matt. Really appreciate your time as always. Ben, not only are you a storytelling master, but a metaphorical master.
Seafood.
Yeah,
seafood
in Nova Scotia, homework and mom. That's a rare talent. I love that. Thanks so much, Ben. Have a good trip to New York. Matt, really appreciate you coming on. And everybody else, we will see you next Thursday on another Elevate Speaker Series. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.